Welcome to episode 210. Do you know who the enemy is? Stay with us.
This is the Elevate Construction Podcast, delivering remarkable content for workers, leaders, and companies in construction wanting to take their next step. Get ready to step out of your comfort zone with Jason Schroeder as he encourages you to do better, live a remarkable life, and expect more. Let's go.
Welcome, everybody. I hope you're doing well. Hey, just one thing really quickly. My voice is fairly gone. It's getting a little bit better. And so I'm going to talk really closely to the microphone and not strain it. I probably sound pretty pathetic, but we have too many wonderful podcast listeners that depend on these and that want these every day. So I'm going to stay committed, and I'm asking you to forgive me for my voice. If this gets so annoying that you can't handle it, or that nobody should be expected to handle it, I'm going to add a podcast episode at the end of this where I interview Gray Childs about the same subject, and you can hear him and his voice. Just skip back to the last 8 minutes if it's too hard to hear me. So anyway, my voice is gone because just finished up a field engineer boot camp, and that's a boot camp where all participants go home with their lives changed, high energy. They go home and cry and confess to their wives or husbands that they want to be better, and they mend relationships, and then they're so tired they fall asleep, and when they wake up, they make massive progress. And so this last boot camp was so good. I usually speak from my diaphragm and in the lower part of my throat to where it doesn't bother my throat. But I just got so carried away with the progress that they were making that I was irresponsible with how I was using my voice. So let's go ahead and do the best we can here. I have high energy. I feel good. I'm passionate about the subject. I'm just caring for my voice. So when you heard the music, dun, 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 you're like, hey, now Jason sounds low energy. No, I'm high energy with a low voice. So there you go. So anyway, welcome everybody. I hope you're doing well, and I'm excited to be with you. This week we're going to have a couple of really cool podcasts and some really great content. I'm getting inspiration every day on some really neat topics to talk to you about. It's over the top good. I want to talk to you tomorrow about taking care of yourself even before work. I want to talk to you about how to deal with some common problems that we're seeing on job sites and with teams that I've recently gotten some feedback for. I've got some more lean content that you'll really want to know about. There's some really good podcast topics. I've got an interview on Friday that you're going to want to check out. It's going to be over the top good, and we're just going to keep going forward and forward and forward. Also, we've got some scheduling expert interviews coming up here pretty soon, and we're just responding every day to feedback. So let's go ahead and get this done. I wanted to cover a couple of things as we go forward, some subjects that I wasn't able to keep in the Elevating Construction Superintendents book, but that are very important to me, and they're not big enough topics to have podcasts about. So this was going to be Principle 12 in the Superintendents book, but let me just go ahead and read it really quickly. And it didn't make it in the final cut because it was too short and out of sequence, but Principle 12, control what you can. Keeping the energy of your team high and keeping good morale on site is paramount for a leader. If the on-site measurement of success is based around things the project team cannot control, then there will be a lack of morale and a sense of failure. Items that are beyond the team's control may typically have to do with the number of RFIs that need submission, the number of change orders from the owner, weather conditions, or whether or not the team is able to get a proper amount of skilled trades on site in that region. What we can and should do is to provide the right metrics from which we can grade ourselves for things that we can control. Things that we can control are aspects such as cleanliness, safety, organization, the rapidity with which we execute certain amounts of work, the amount of planning that we perform before executing work, and other things that are inherent with on-site management and operational control. The saying goes, control the things you can. And the reason for doing this is to not only have our focus on the appropriate things, but to keep the energy and the morale for the project team high. And so energy has been a focus throughout centuries, not decades, centuries, with some of the greatest war generals in history and some of the best leaders in history. It's because the energy of your people and your team is paramount. And so do not attempt to keep people's energy high in a losing situation. Everything you can control must be controlled. And that's why I focus so much on cleanliness, safety, organization, and planning, because we can control those things. So make sure you're always focusing in that area, in that realm. So before we get into the podcast content, let me talk to you about some of the things that I'm excited about in life. Right now, one of the main things that I'm really enjoying is the consulting that I'm doing. Next week, I get to help facilitate an executive level team offsite meeting, not the fluffy, like trust fall offsites, but like a real meaningful, in-depth offsite meeting. And I'm really excited for that because whoever develops their team the best always wins. And I'm working with an organization now where they listen, they have their own ideas, they merge my ideas with theirs, they're sharp, they do their own research, and they implement fast, and they implement together. And the things they've been able to do just in the course of a couple of months is so remarkable that I can't even explain it without taking up a whole podcast. And I'm not sure that would be appropriate because you'd start to figure out who I'm talking about. But when we can get teams really built well and a clarity of an organization understood and communicate that clarity and then reinforce that clarity through human systems, that's when the organization becomes remarkable. So that's what I'm excited about right now. Have a lot more of that type of consulting coming up. And I wish I could even see more because it pays such dividends. So let me talk really briefly about some feedback that we're getting. Real quick, I am so tipped over. I uploaded a nice, beautiful, brand new cover with any corrections on it. And I got it back, and I'm not a victim. This sounds really whiny of me, but I got it back from the graphic design place, and I uploaded it because I had checked the areas that I had changed. And I found out today that some of the most recent printed books have 2 P's in the word superintendent on the back. And I'm like, my goodness, this is ridiculous. If you ever publish a book, you have 3 or 4 people check that cover. It's been a nightmare. So if any of you who have one of those, you can either keep the vintage copy with the 2 P's in it, or you can let me know and I will send you one with the correct spelling on the binding. What I do love is that there's I wish I could tell you, there's so many people that are downloading and purchasing this book and using it. I'm getting so much feedback that it's a game changer. And so what I'm happy about is that people aren't too critical, but they're looking at the content, and the content isn't even for me. It's stuff I've been researching for over 15 years. And so I'm very happy about that. But here's some feedback that I got. Awesome podcast. This is about the podcast. Hello, Jason. I am new to your podcast, and man, am I loving it. Great job. Please keep going. The information you are giving out is truly helpful. I actually have a request. Could you touch on relationships between contractors and suppliers? What do you think drives a relationship with a ready-mix supplier? Is it the sales representative, the service provided? What are your thoughts? Thank you again for spreading knowledge to help others. And so actually, I have some pretty neat insight on this. I'll actually do a podcast on this with some people that are in that industry. And so I appreciate the feedback. I will make sure to get that going, and on we go. So the conflict that I want to talk to you about tonight is that we are not identifying the enemy on our project sites. Now, you've heard me talk a little bit about this before, but I really want to make a point here. and really liken it to an analogy. This is actually an analogy that we talk about in FE Boot Camp, and so I recently got to tell this story, and that's why it's been on my mind. So I'm going to tell you my abbreviation of the notes that a person named Gray Childs taught me, and then I'm going to add him saying it at the end. And we're going to it'll be a little bit different from one to the other. If you don't want to spend the time after the closing credits to listen to what he has to say, absolutely no pressure there. Or if you want to go straight to his, that's totally fine. But I just thought the difference of opinion there would be pretty neat. So let's just go ahead and get right into it. The Roman Empire was pretty organized when it came to warfare and government for a period. And they had a sword called the Spanish mains gladius. This is a shorter sword, and and there's a tradition actually that I would love to start and actually I wouldn't have started it. It would be Gray Childs that would have started it. But I would love any construction company to issue and purchase a Romans or a Spanish mains gladius, but in this case a Romans mains gladius, for any of your leaders that are really diligent in fighting against waste and variation. And I work with organizations where once you've been gifted a sword and then you have a code as the master builder and you give that speech when you accept that sword, now you're the only one authorized to award that same sword in defense and in the attack and pursuit of eliminating waste and variation in the construction industry. And I have one that was gifted to me by Gray Childs. I've gifted out 4 or 5, and the tradition continues in a few companies. I think it's a really beautiful thing, and it symbolizes something pretty neat. And that is that we are constantly at war with waste and variation. And Gray Childs talks about how centurions, their leadership, they led the men, and they knew their charges, they worked together, and they formed a cohesive unit. And by being a team, they went and did great things with that sword, because if you're in line with that sword with the rest of your legionnaires, your other soldiers, you can't wield a big sword as a team. You have a smaller sword, and as you move forward with your shields together in lockstep, you have enough space to move that sword forward and to issue a death blow with that sword, but it's much shorter. Longer swords, more self-aggrandizing swords wouldn't work in that team environment. It was about 30 inches long, and it was shorter by comparison. But the thing is they stood together. They were organized as a unit, and they held the line, and they stood at their stations. And they were always at war with the enemy, not with each other, and they were working together. And I'll let Gray Childs explain that in his portion of the podcast as I add it to the end of this. What I want to say is that a good friend of mine, Kevin Rice, once told me about the Triarii, Triarii. And it's something that I really like to talk about at times, because the Triarii were or in the singular Triarius, were one of the elements of the early Roman military manipular legions of the early Roman Republic. That was 509 BC to 107 BC. They were the oldest and among the wealthiest men in the army and could afford high-quality equipment. They wore heavy metal armor and carried large shields, their usual position being the third battle line. They were equipped with spears and were considered to be elite soldiers among the legion. During the Camillan era, they fought in a shallow phalanx formation supported by light troops. In most battles, Triarii were not used because the lighter troops usually defeated the enemy before the Triarii were committed to the battle. They were meant to be used as a decisive force in the battle, thus prompting an old Roman saying, "It comes down to the Triarii," which meant carrying it to the bitter end, which means that if the enemy was somewhat conquering or winning, they would say it comes down to the Triarii. This legion, being third in the battle line, was the one that was like the most fierce and was counted on to make sure that they made it no further. And so when I think about waste and variation, we are at war with waste and variation everywhere. Everything on our projects is trying to kill our men and women out there. Everything on our projects is trying to disrespect people. And it's our job to keep people safe and to have really high expectations when it comes to safety and quality and organization. And I think about general superintendents and senior superintendents and these great builders who know the ropes, know how to build. They're like the Triarii. They are the most elite of the legion, and they're third in line. And when it comes down to a project struggling, I would say it comes down to the Triarii. It comes down to those really experienced women and men who know how to build, who know that we're supposed to be protecting people, and to those people who really care and they have higher expectations. And so what I wanted to say is that the Romans, and I've talked to you about this before, protecting themselves from arrows, they would put their shields above themselves. Advancing forward in the line in a rhythm with a whistle, they would advance forward together as a team using the smaller swords. That's like rhythm, that's flow, that's tact planning. We do the same thing in construction. They worked together, they communicated together, and they were loyal together. They knew their charges, they formed a cohesive unit, they stood together, they held the line, and they stood at their stations. And so I'll let Great Childs finish the rest of this as I play that podcast that was from a time when I worked at DPR Construction. I think you'll really enjoy it. But my bottom line is we don't sometimes in construction have a high enough set point against waste and variation. We don't let it bother us enough. We don't let it annoy us enough. We don't get mad enough about it. And then we don't do anything about it. And our set points are too low. And what I'm saying is we need to raise our set point, and we need to be the proud women and men in that third line, the Triarii, that are the most valuable and experienced in the legion, in the battalion. And I want to encourage us to say, if there's a project struggling, it comes down to us. If there are people disrespected, we're going to change it. It comes down to us. If somebody needs to make a hard decision and terminate a cancerous person that's hurting people, it comes down to us. And if we need to make hard decisions and push back on the owner a little bit, it comes down to us. And if we need to fire an employer or somebody because they're not safe, it comes down to us. The battle comes down to us. And so we can't be wimpy and weak when it comes to these decisions. I'll give you a brief little story, then I'll switch over to this other podcast. The other day I had an experience where there was somebody who was being unsafe, and it was the second or third time that it had happened. And the person was still on the job, and 2 or 3 people on the job said, I wish that person was gone, but nobody was doing anything about it. And I was riding home with one of the persons, and they said, "Hey, I want you to teach me. I want you to teach me to be more like you." And I said, "If that person is still there on Monday, then you're not anything like me. Because if I was there and had any authority whatsoever, that person would be gone to protect our people." And that's the point. If it doesn't matter if you're a field engineer or an office engineer or anybody, you have the authority to stop anything like that that's unsafe. And if you don't, you're working for the wrong company or the wrong person within that company. It comes down to us. We have to fight against waste and variation, and we have to do our jobs, because at the end of the day, and I'll leave you with this, these men and women and children are sending their loved ones to work, and they're counting on them for sure. But at the end of the day, they're looking straight at us in our eyes and counting on us to make sure that they come home safely and that they're protected for generations to come. And so I hope you find my interview with Great Childs from a long time ago really interesting. I'll add it right now. But I just want to say I love all of you guys. I'm seeing the numbers of downloads on this podcast, and I'm just blown away. I appreciate you. I always will. And I hope that you have nothing but success and all of the good things that you and your family deserves. That's the purpose of this podcast, is because you deserve a remarkable life. On we go. Hello, everybody. We've got Gray Childs and Jake Smaley and Carson.
Yep.
Here doing a podcast while we're driving in Austin, but we're not looking at the phone, so technically I think it's okay. So say hi, Gray, Jake.
Hi, Gray. Hi, Jake. Hi, Carson.
You know, every time you guys do this, it gets worse and worse every time. I like that. We're all tired from a long day. Anyway, we're gonna do so Gray was jamming out to a pretty neat little segment about comparing some lessons from history from Rome and how their soldiers dealt with things and the role that they played in not only, well, I'm not going to give the punchline, but so I'll just go ahead and stop right there. But Gray, would you go ahead and give us that example from the Roman Empire that you were talking about
Sure.
a little bit earlier?
Sure. Thanks a lot. So so when you think about history and we think about the Roman Empire, obviously it's very impressive. At one point in time, it spanned almost all of the known world. And when you think about how do you build something that great, it takes a similar tack to the things we're trying to do here at DPR, and that's build great things. That's our charge. And so when you look at what they were able to accomplish, you kind of step back and take a look at it and say, well, what did they do? How did they make this happen? Well, it wasn't by accident. Number one, there was organization. So, and that comes from where they were going to go next, how they were choosing to expand next, how they went about organizing their military and their troops, and how everybody worked together. So then their formations down to the individual units. And that was their first quality. That's one of the ways they're able to conquer the known world. This thing that they did that was really outstanding is technology. So they embraced new ideas, technology, and they weren't afraid to borrow from others. So we know that they borrowed from the Greeks, but for example, their main sword was actually a Spanish sword called a gladius. And that Spanish mains gladius actually was the sword used by those troops whenever they went and conquered the known world. But the most important thing that they had going for them was leadership. And that went all the way down to the individual unit level, to the centurions, etc., where they would actually go about leading their men. They knew who they were. They knew their charges. They worked together and formed that cohesive unit. And only by forming that unit, that team, were they able to go out and do great things. And that's the way they were able to take a really short sword, like the Romans' mains gladius, which is only about 30 inches from stem to stern on average, sometimes a little bigger, sometimes a little less, but about 30 inches. They were able to take this sword that, in comparison to most of the people that they were fighting at that time, by itself, if you were one-on-one, you would probably lose because you didn't have the same reach as they did. But the reason that sword worked is because they were able to stand together, organized as a unit, shoulder to shoulder, and leverage that sword in a particular way, that tool in a particular fashion that allowed them to take and overtake their enemy.
And hold the line.
And hold the line. So they've worked together in their stations and stay at their stations, which is something we constantly want to reinforce at DPR. Everybody has a role. Everybody has a station, and we want to stay in that station. And that's what they were able to do successfully. And by knowing that and doing that, they were able to conquer their enemies. We have the same thing in front of us. Our true foes are waste and variance. Those are the true opponents that we fight every day here at DPR. By using the tools that we have in front of us, Takt, P6, by using the PSPP wheel from right people to plan first, to right level of detail, by using those tools, by staying in our roles, by staying in our lane, knowing our station, by staying true to that, we can do the same thing and conquer our foes, waste and variance.
And I like when you talked about embracing technology, having stable environments, and having leadership, that's lean right there. Lean is stable environments. It's respect for people, that teaming, that leadership, and continuous improvement ever forward. So I love that. There was another thing you taught Jake and me, something that we hadn't previously thought, which was, I don't want to give it away, but that they weren't just our yes. So I think that's a really neat point but anyway, go make your point and I got to follow comment.
Sure. So the other interesting thing about the Roman military is that it understood that in order to expand, in order to keep growing, it had to be great builders as well. So that's why even today we still have Roman roads that stretch throughout that known empire at the time. That's why there are things like Hadrian's Wall in England. That's why you have really great artifacts like the Colosseum, like the Pantheon, because while you may not know this, the Roman army were the same folks who did all that building. They were very diverse. They embraced technology. They had great organization. They had excellent discipline, staying in your lane, staying where you're supposed to be, staying at your station. And by combining those things together with being great builders, they were able to overcome tremendous adversity.
And we can liken that to what we do because, like you said, they use the same tools and techniques in war that they did in construction. We can do the same thing. And sometimes people give me a hard time about likening construction to war. I'm not talking about war where you're fighting amongst your own team. When you call something a war room, you're not in there to have a war. You're in there to collaborate. But like you said, the enemy is waste and variation. And, the sooner that we realize, in my opinion, that everything on site is trying to kill us, everything on site is trying to take us down, everything on site, if left uncontrolled, is trying to ruin our families, our lives, our careers. Everything on site's trying to treat us like animals. And if we don't control that, fight against that waste and that variation, then we're in a losing battle, and we're on the risk of being in a career that really isn't fulfilling. We're here to bless people's lives, and every time we let a job site get out of control, that's not just the job. That's children, that's wives, that's divorces, you could just go on and on, you know what I mean? We're here to make a difference. So I really like the fact that we can take war examples, war techniques, these lessons from history, and use them on a day-to-day basis in construction. So I think that's I appreciate you teaching us that. Jake, did you have anything before we close this down?
Nope, I'm good.
You pouting because we didn't include you more in the podcast?
No, I'm good.
Okay, all right, great. Hey, thank you very much. We appreciate you. We'll see you on the next one. Hey, I forgot to introduce. This is the Field Operations Podcast for the day. Love you guys. See you tomorrow.
Please join us next time in elevating the entire construction experience for workers, leaders, and companies coast to coast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to share with your construction colleagues and help us spread the word by rating, subscribing, and leaving a review on your preferred podcast listening platform. We really appreciate it. We'll catch you next time on the Elevate Construction Podcast.